The German Shepherd had a reputation that sent shivers down the spines of anyone who even whispered his name. Locked inside a reinforced steel cage at the small animal control facility on the outskirts of a quiet Midwestern town, he paced relentlessly, muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. Amber eyes burned with fury and fear, darting from the bars to the faces of the handlers who occasionally dared to come close. Dangerous. Unpredictable, the signs on his cage warned, though anyone who looked closely could see a shadow of something else in those eyes, a deep, aching loneliness. It had been 3 months since the shepherd, a retired police dog named Rocco, had arrived at the facility after a raid gone wrong. His former handler had retired, leaving him behind because of a leg injury that slowed his movements. In the city streets, he had been a hero. At the facility, he was labeled a menace. The contrast wasn't lost on the animal control staff who, despite their training, couldn't help but feel an uncomfortable guilt whenever they glanced at him. They saw a creature trapped by circumstance, a warrior discarded like yesterday's newspaper. On this particular afternoon, the skies darkened ominously. Storm clouds rolled in over the town and the wind whipped through the trees outside, rattling the facility windows. Inside, Rocco sensed the change, his ears twitching, eyes tracking the shadows cast by the flickering fluorescent lights. Something was different today. Something was about to happen. Across the facility's narrow road lay a small playground where children often came after school. Today, a lone little girl, Emily, was swinging. 7 years old, with her brown hair tied into a messy ponytail and wide eyes full of curiosity, she had wandered a little farther from her mother, enchanted by the rhythmic sway of the swing set. She didn't see the storm clouds gathering above, nor did she hear the anxious whispers of parents calling her name from a distance. All that mattered to her was the motion of the swings, the sensation of flying just above the wet grass. Inside the facility, Rocco's patience snapped. The latch of his cage, worn and slightly bent from years of forced containment, gave way with a soft click under the weight of his paw. For a moment he froze, instinctively aware of the danger that lay in freedom. Then, with a sudden, powerful shove, the gate splintered, the steel frame bending outward as he propelled himself into the air. Alarms blared, echoing across the facility and into the surrounding neighborhood. Staff screamed, scrambling toward the exit doors, but Rocco had already gone. He emerged into the storm with a mix of rage, pain, and desperate longing. Rain fell in sheets, soaking his thick coat and streaking his fur with mud, but he barely noticed. His eyes scanned the open field, then locked onto the playground across the street. And there she was, Emily, alone, a tiny figure in a massive, frightening world. Rocco froze for a heartbeat, nostrils flaring, muscles tensing, not in aggression, but in recognition. The officers were on their heels, shouting for him to stop, to come back, to obey. The sound barely registered to Rocco. He wasn't running wild for the sake of violence. He was running for something, though even he wasn't sure what. Emily noticed the commotion next. At first, it was the shouts of strangers, the adults' panicked voices carrying over the rain. She turned, thinking maybe a friend was calling her, and then she saw him. A massive German shepherd, wet and imposing, barreling down the street with lightning speed. Her heart leapt, and her body froze in instinctual terror. Every survival instinct screamed for her to run, to hide, to get far away from the approaching animal. But then, as she looked into his eyes, something unexpected happened. She didn't see a mindless predator. She saw pain. She saw fear. She saw a creature that was desperately trying to survive, just like she was. Something in Emily clicked, a strange, inexplicable sense of understanding, and instead of running, she stood her ground. The crowd of parents and bystanders was screaming now. "Run, Emily, get out of the way. He's dangerous, call 911, but she ignored them, she focused on him. The German shepherd skidded to a halt a few feet away from her, rainwater spraying across the concrete. His breathing was heavy, uneven. He lowered his head, ears pressed back, and Emily, despite the fear clawing at her chest, whispered softly, "It's okay, I'm not afraid of you." The words barely left her lips when Rocco's body trembled. The tension in his shoulders eased ever so slightly, as though her courage had given him a reason to pause. For a fleeting moment, time seemed suspended. Officers raised tranquilizer guns, unsure whether to shoot or wait. Parents clutched their children, hearts pounding. But Emily remained, eyes wide, focused, and unflinching. Then lightning cracked across the sky, startling both human and canine. Rocco flinched, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Emily's small hand reached out, fingers trembling, and she brushed a hand across his soaked fur. The crowd gasped. No one could believe what they were seeing. A ferocious dog, infamous for aggression, standing calmly next to a tiny girl, allowing her to touch him. But Rocco was more than his reputation. He was more than the cage, the labels, the fear. He was a wounded soul, and Emily, in her bravery, had reached something buried deep inside him. For a moment the storm seemed to hold its breath. Rocco's eyes darted from Emily to the approaching officers, to the flashing sirens, and back to the girl who hadn't run. The world around them was chaos, shouts, rain, alarms, and fear. But in the small circle between them there was a fragile, trembling peace. And then a loud crack of thunder split the sky, closer this time. Rocco's muscles tensed again, his body coiled like a spring. Emily's grip tightened instinctively, and she leaned closer, whispering, "It's okay, I'm here." But before anyone could process what would happen next, Rocco lurched forward, moving past the little girl, not in attack, but in flight, dragging her slightly with him as he bounded toward the nearby woods. Chaos erupted instantly. Officers sprinted, shouts escalating into panic. Parents screamed. Emily's small legs kicked against the mud, but she held on, her tiny hands gripping Rocco's thick fur. And in that terrifying instant, everyone realized the unthinkable. The ferocious German shepherd had escaped, but the little girl hadn't. She had refused to run. And no one knew what would happen next. The storm raged. Rain poured in sheets, washing the world in gray and silver. The playground was abandoned, swings swaying in the wind. The only movement belonged to a wounded, feral-looking shepherd and a fearless little girl who refused to flee. And somewhere in the distance, the shadows of the woods seemed to stretch out, waiting, holding secrets only the dog and the girl were about to uncover. This was the moment that would change everything. The shepherd wasn't a monster. Emily wasn't a victim. But neither of them knew just how close danger truly was, or how far their bond would be tested in the hours to come. And as the rain-slicked world blurred around them, officers realized the terrifying truth. The next step wasn't just a chase. It was a question of survival. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the grassy slope into a slick, muddy slide. Emily's small hands clutched the thick, wet fur of the German shepherd as he barreled through the puddled field, his powerful legs propelling them forward at an astonishing pace. Her heart raced, a mix of adrenaline and fear, yet there was no panic in her mind. She hadn't run, she couldn't. Somehow, instinct, or perhaps some deep, unspoken understanding told her to stay. Rocco's amber eyes flicked constantly, scanning the surroundings. Each shadow, each tree line was scrutinized for danger. Though the adults behind them shouted and waved their arms, trying to regain control, their words were muffled by the roar of the storm and the pounding of Emily's own heartbeat. She could feel the strength in Rocco's body, the strain in his limbs from months of neglect and injury, yet he moved with an urgent purpose. He wasn't attacking, he was protecting. Emily's boots slipped in the mud, sending a shiver up her legs, but Rocco slowed just enough to allow her to regain her footing. She pressed her forehead against his damp shoulder, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his chest. "It's okay, big guy," she whispered, her voice almost lost to the storm. "We'll be okay. I won't leave you." Her words were simple, yet they carried a conviction far beyond her years, a quiet defiance that startled even the chasing officers. Behind them, the animal control officers, now joined by local police, struggled to keep up. Radios squawked with frantic updates, orders were barked, and the flashing lights of patrol cars reflected off the wet ground. "He's just a dog. Don't let the girl get too close," one officer shouted, desperation in his voice. But Emily didn't hear him. She wasn't thinking about the warnings or the danger. Her focus was Rocco. the creature she had chosen to trust when everyone else had screamed at her to run. The woods loomed ahead, a dense, dark tangle of trees and underbrush that looked almost impenetrable. Emily shivered, partly from the cold, partly from anticipation. "We have to hide," she muttered, gripping Rocco's fur tighter. The dog seemed to understand, darting into the edge of the forest with a speed that made her lungs burn and her arms ache. Branches slapped against her face and tore at her sleeves, but she didn't release her grip. Each obstacle became a shared struggle, a silent partnership forged in the chaos of a stormy afternoon. Rocco suddenly stopped near a fallen tree, massive and slick with rain. He dropped to his haunches, ears alert, body tense. Emily stumbled forward and fell onto the wet ground, mud coating her cheeks. She winced, thinking she had hurt herself, but Rocco nudged her gently with his nose, his amber eyes scanning the forest edge as though issuing a warning. Something moved in the shadows. A flicker, almost imperceptible, but enough to trigger the dog's instincts. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. "What is it?" she whispered, voice trembling. Rocco growled low in his throat, not a threat to her but a signal. Emily realized she couldn't see it, couldn't identify it, but she trusted him completely. The adults would never understand. They saw a ferocious animal, but she saw a protector, a silent guardian with a mind and heart of his own. Then movement. A dark shape darted between the trees, a coyote, eyes gleaming, teeth bared. It was thin, desperate, wild. Hunger and fear twisted its frame into something ugly and dangerous. Emily froze, but Rocco reacted instantly. Despite his injuries, despite the storm and his exhaustion, he leapt toward the shadow, positioning himself between Emily and the coyote. He barked deep, guttural, commanding, but not blindly. Every movement was calculated, precise. Emily pressed herself into the fallen tree, trembling. She wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but the same courage that had kept her beside Rocco now held her in place. She saw the animal circle, then lunge. Rocco lunged back, fangs bared, and the forest echoed with the sounds of the clash. Leaves and mud flew, teeth snapped in the wet, and Emily clutched the dog's fur, praying. She realized then that Rocco wasn't just protecting her. He was fighting for her life, knowing that without him, she would be exposed, vulnerable, alone. Minutes or maybe seconds stretched unbearably. Emily could feel her muscles cramping from holding onto the massive dog. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder, whispering, you're okay," over and over. Rocco's body shook from the effort, but he did not retreat. The coyote yelped, then retreated into the shadows, leaving the forest eerily silent, save for the pounding rain. Rocco collapsed onto his side, panting heavily, one ear flicking toward Emily as if checking that she was still there. Officers and bystanders had finally caught up, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Guns lowered, hands reaching hesitantly, afraid to break the fragile bond forming in the storm-soaked woods. "Is she okay?" one officer asked. Emily nodded without looking at him. She was safe for the moment. But she could feel Rocco's pain, the soreness in his limbs, the shallow panting that betrayed his exhaustion. She knew instinctively that he had pushed himself to the limit to protect her. Storm's intensity didn't abate. Lightning crackled overhead, illuminating the soaked trees in stark white flashes. Emily noticed Rocco limping, dragging one paw slightly, his ribs visible through his wet, matted fur. Panic clawed at her chest, not for herself this time, but for the dog who had saved her. "We have to get help," she whispered, stroking his neck gently. But Rocco's ears perked at every sound, the distant wail of sirens, the snap of branches, the muffled voices of strangers calling out. He wasn't ready to leave, and neither was Emily. Suddenly the forest shifted. Something unseen moved closer. Emily's stomach knotted with fear. She gripped Rocco tightly, feeling his muscles tense beneath her hands. He barked once warningly. Then a faint growl answered from deeper in the woods, a second coyote, a trap, or something worse. Emily's pulse spiked and she whispered almost to herself, "Don't leave me, please don't leave me." Rocco's head turned toward her, eyes locking onto hers. For the briefest moment, everything else vanished, the storm, the woods, the danger. There was only the dog and the girl, two unlikely companions bound together by fear, trust, and something stronger, an unspoken understanding. And as the wind tore through the trees, Emily realized one terrifying truth. Escaping the cage had been only the beginning. The real danger was still ahead, lurking somewhere in the shadows of the storm-soaked forest. From the distance, a flashlight flickered through the falling rain, cutting through the darkness in intermittent beams. The officers were closing in, unsure whether to intervene or let nature take its course. Emily's parents were somewhere behind, shouting her name, but she didn't hear them. She couldn't. Her entire focus was on Rocco and the way he had risked everything to keep her safe. And when he let out a low, almost mournful whine, Emily knew it was a warning. Something was coming. Something that could undo everything they had survived so far. Her tiny hand pressed against his damp fur and she whispered again, voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm not afraid. Not with you." Rocco's ears flicked, his body coiled, and the forest seemed to hold its breath with them. Somewhere in the dark, unseen eyes watched. The storm raged on, but within that small, trembling circle of trust, two souls had formed an unbreakable bond. And in the heart of that storm, Emily and Rocco were about to face a challenge that neither could have imagined. The next move belonged to the forest, to the shadows, to the danger lying just beyond the trees. And as Emily clung to Rocco, she understood something far bigger than herself. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was standing your ground when everyone else ran. And Rocco, the so-called ferocious German shepherd, was about to prove that courage came in many forms, some with fur, some with tiny hands, and some with hearts brave enough to face the storm together. The forest seemed to close around them, each tree a looming sentinel dripping with rainwater. Emily clung to Rocco's soaked fur, mud streaking her small face, eyes wide as the shadows shifted and danced in the storm's flickering light. She could feel every muscle in his body tense beneath her hands, every tremor of exhaustion mixed with instinctive alertness. He was more than a dog. He was her protector, her guardian, a force of nature she had somehow convinced to trust her. Branches snapped under Rocco's paws as he moved deeper into the woods, dragging Emily along with him. Her small feet slipped and slid, her arms aching, but she refused to let go. Every time she faltered, she felt the firm press of Rocco's shoulder, the reassuring warmth of his body, and she remembered the moment she had chosen not to run. That choice had led them here, into this wet, dark world of looming danger, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Not completely. The chase behind them had slowed. Officers and animal control personnel struggled through the underbrush, voices raised in panic and commands, but the forest seemed to swallow their shouts. Emily could hear the faint hum of sirens in the distance, but they were muted by the storm and the thick canopy above. She realized with a mix of awe and fear that the world beyond the trees had become irrelevant. Here, survival was measured in every careful step, every flick of Rocco's ears, every quiet breath he took. Suddenly, Rocco stopped. Emily's heart leapt into her throat as he crouched low, muscles coiled, eyes scanning the underbrush. He let out a low growl, almost a warning, and Emily followed his gaze. Movement faint, almost invisible, but enough to make her blood run cold. A second coyote, larger, more feral than the first, emerged from the shadows. Its coat was matted, and its eyes gleamed with hunger and madness, reflecting the flashes of lightning. Emily froze, clinging to Rocco. The dog stepped in front of her, positioning himself like a shield. "He's not going to let it hurt me," she whispered to herself, though her voice trembled. Rocco's tail stiffened, his growl deepening into a warning rumble. He wasn't aggressive toward her, but toward whatever threatened his human companion, he was relentless. The coyote circled, snarling, teeth bared, claws digging into the soft, muddy earth. Emily's mind raced. The adults behind them could do nothing. Rocco was the only one between her and the predator. She realized the magnitude of her choice not to run. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a chase. This was life and death, and every instinct that had guided her so far was about to be tested. Then in a blur of motion, Rocco lunged. The coyote snapped, lunged back, and the forest echoed with the sounds of the clash, snarls, barks, and the wet slap of paws and claws. Emily pressed herself against the fallen tree, mud coating her hands, face, and legs, but she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She whispered Rocco's name over and over, her tiny voice merging with the storm, urging him, supporting him, connecting in a way no human could. The fight was brutal but brief. Rocco's body, despite his injuries, moved with a precision that came from years of training. Each strike, each bite, each maneuver was calculated. Emily could feel his ribs flexing under her hands, the strain in his limbs as he dodged and countered. She realized with a mixture of fear and awe that she was witnessing a hero in motion, not a ferocious animal, but a warrior whose ferocity was measured in courage, not cruelty. Finally, the coyote yelped and bolted into the shadows, leaving the forest eerily silent except for the pounding rain. Rocco collapsed onto his side, exhausted, panting heavily. Emily pressed herself against him, hugging him tightly despite the mud, the rain, and the exhaustion. She could feel every tremor in his body, every beat of his heart racing against the storm. He had saved her. He had protected her when no one else could. For a long moment, neither moved. Emily rested her forehead against his shoulder, whispering reassurances that felt as much for herself as for him. "It's okay, big guy, we're safe now. You're okay." Her voice was soft but insistent, carrying an unspoken gratitude that went beyond words. Rocco's head turned slightly, eyes flicking toward her, and in that glance Emily felt an unbreakable bond, an understanding that transcended age, species, and circumstance. From the edge of the forest, lights flickered. Officers had caught up, their weapons lowered in cautious relief. Some approached slowly, hands raised, wary of breaking the fragile trust that had formed between girl and dog. Are they okay?" one officer asked, voice trembling with a mix of awe and disbelief. Emily nodded, too focused on Rocco to answer them fully. She was safe. He was safe. That was all that mattered. The storm showed no mercy, but in the small, tense circle of survival, Emily and Rocco had found a fragile peace. She noticed the cuts and bruises marring his fur, the shallow panting that betrayed his exhaustion, and a new panic gripped her heart. He had given everything to protect her. How could she possibly repay him? How could anyone understand the depth of what had just happened? Suddenly, another sound, a faint whimper from deeper in the woods, caught Emily's attention. She froze. Rocco's ears pricked, his body stiffening again. The quiet had shifted from relief to alert, and Emily realized with growing dread that their ordeal wasn't over. Something else was out there, something they hadn't seen yet. She pressed herself closer to Rocco, feeling the warmth of his wet, trembling body beneath her, and whispered, "We'll face it together, okay?" The dog's growl was low but certain, a promise more than a warning. Emily felt her pulse spike, her small chest tightening with fear, yet she also felt a strange, fierce pride. She hadn't run. She had stood her ground, and in doing so she had forged a bond that no storm, no wild animal, and no chaos could break. Above them, lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in stark white flashes. For a heartbeat, everything was visible: the soaked leaves, the trembling branches, the muddy ground, the glint of Rocco's amber eyes, and the tiny, determined girl who refused to run. Emily knew instinctively that the next challenge was coming, that the forest held more secrets and dangers than they had imagined. And yet, she didn't flinch. Rocco's eyes locked onto the shadows ahead, ears pricked, body coiled for action. Emily tightened her grip, heart hammering, and whispered again, "I'm not afraid. Not with you." The words carried a weight far beyond her age. She didn't understand fully what it meant to survive in the chaos of the wild, but she understood trust, courage, and loyalty. And she understood Rocco. From the distance, another sound, more distinct, more deliberate, broke through the storm. Footsteps. A low growl, something moving closer. Emily's stomach churned. She pressed herself against the dog, feeling every muscle in his body tense, preparing for whatever came next. The adults might be catching up, the authorities might arrive, but in this moment, in this rain-soaked forest, it was just them. Just her and Rocco, and the unknown that waited just beyond the trees. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the edge of the forest where shadows twisted unnaturally. Rocco's growl deepened, a rumble that vibrated through Emily's chest. She tightened her grip on his fur, biting back a scream as she realized that the next moment could decide everything: life, death, trust, survival. And in that charged, trembling pause, every heartbeat, every drop of rain, every sound in the forest seemed magnified. Emily closed her eyes for a brief second, whispered one more reassurance, and opened them again. The storm had become a backdrop to a story far larger than she had ever imagined. Rocco, the so-called ferocious dog, had saved her. And now, together, they were about to confront whatever the forest had hidden from them, testing courage, trust, and the fragile line between fear and heroism. And somewhere in the shadows of the wet, trembling woods, unseen eyes waited, watching, calculating, ready. Emily didn't know it yet, but the true danger was only just beginning. The forest swallowed them whole. Rain drummed against the canopy, muffling the distant shouts of officers and the angry bark of the storm itself. Emily clutched Rocco's thick fur with a grip that burned her small hands, her boots slipping in the mud, yet she refused to let go. Every instinct screamed to run, to seek shelter, to escape the unknown. But she had made her choice. She would not abandon the dog who had saved her. Not now. Not ever. Rocco bounded through the wet underbrush, muscles coiled, paws digging into the softened earth for purchase. His every step was precise, despite the pain that radiated from his injured leg. Emily felt the tremors under her hands, the subtle shivers in his body that betrayed exhaustion. And yet he ran, driven by something beyond fear or instinct, loyalty, courage, and a determination to keep her safe no matter the cost. The officers had slowed to a crawl at the edge of the woods, unwilling to follow too closely. The forest was treacherous, fallen branches, hidden roots, slick mud. Their radios squawked updates, but the storm distorted the signal, leaving the team in dangerous uncertainty. Emily's mother was somewhere behind, calling her name frantically, but Emily didn't hear her. She couldn't. Her focus was on the rhythm of Rocco's stride, on the rising anticipation in the air, and on the strange bond that had formed between them. Branches whipped at her face, tearing at her sleeves, but she pressed forward, leaning into the powerful dog who seemed to know exactly where to go. Lightning split the sky above them, illuminating the forest in stark flashes, revealing the depth and density of the woods. The shadows seemed alive, twisting and writhing as if the trees themselves were watching, waiting. Emily shivered, but she did not scream. Courage, she realized, wasn't the absence of fear. It was standing firm despite it. Rocco stopped suddenly at the base of a fallen tree. Emily pitched forward, her chest pressing against his shoulder. Mud streaked her face, rain plastering her hair against her scalp. The dog's ears flicked sharply, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the damp air. A faint, almost imperceptible sound reached his sensitive ears, a snapping twig, a rustle in the underbrush. His growl rumbled deep in his chest, low and warning, and Emily froze. "What is it?" she whispered, voice trembling but steady. Rocco did not answer with words. Instead, he shifted his weight, positioning himself squarely in front of her, body taut and protective. His amber eyes scanned the shadows, then flicked toward Emily, seeking reassurance. She pressed her small hand against his damp neck, whispering, "I'm not afraid, big guy, not with you." The forest responded. A dark shape emerged from the brush, a large coyote, thin and desperate, eyes glinting with hunger and madness. Its movement was deliberate, calculated, and dangerous. Emily's stomach twisted in fear, but she did not move. Rocco growled, a deep, commanding sound that reverberated through the wet earth. He stepped forward, placing himself fully between Emily and the predator. The coyote lunged. Rocco met it with precision, a blur of teeth, paws, and agility. Emily pressed herself against his side, feeling the raw power of his body, every sinew coiled with purpose. Mud splattered around them as they battled, the storm turning the forest floor into a chaotic battlefield of survival. She whispered encouragements, tiny words that seemed inconsequential yet carried the weight of trust, love, and fear. "You can do it, you're okay, you're safe." The coyote snarled and retreated, only to circle again, hunger driving its persistence. Rocco barked sharply, lunging forward with authority, forcing the predator back. Emily's hands gripped his fur tightly, knuckles white with tension. She could feel the heat of his body, the trembling of exhaustion, yet his determination never wavered. In that moment, he was not just a dog. He was a shield, a guardian, a warrior fighting for something greater than himself. The rain intensified, sheets of water cascading from the canopy, turning the forest into a blur of gray and green. Emily's face was streaked with mud, her hair plastered to her forehead, yet she remained steadfast. She realized the true depth of her connection with Rocco, a bond forged in fear, tested in chaos, strengthened by courage. And she understood that this forest, these shadows, and this storm were not the end. They were the crucible in which their trust would be tested. Suddenly, a louder sound emerged from deeper within the trees, a branch snapping under weight far heavier than a coyote. Rocco froze, ears pricked, muscles coiled. Emily's heart leapt. Something else was coming, something bigger. Her pulse raced, her small body trembling with anticipation and fear. She pressed closer to Rocco, feeling the comforting heat of his body, the protective presence of his stance. The unknown moved closer, its steps deliberate, measured, and threatening. Emily whispered to Rocco, "We'll face it together, okay?" His head turned slightly, amber eyes locking onto hers, and in that silent gaze she felt reassurance, promise, and courage. Whatever was coming, they would face it side by side. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Rain pounded the leaves, lightning flashed through the branches, and the shadows grew deeper, darker. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the distant growl, was amplified in Emily's ears. She realized how fragile their situation was. One wrong move, one misstep, and the danger could overwhelm them both. Yet in that tension, she felt alive, aware, and connected to the world in a way she had never been before. Rocco's growl deepened as the source of the movement became clear. From the shadows emerged another coyote, larger, more feral than the first, teeth bared, eyes glinting with hunger. Emily gasped softly, clutching Rocco's fur, her mind racing. She had not imagined the magnitude of the danger lurking in the forest. The first coyote had been a warning. This one was the real test. Rocco shifted, body coiled, muscles taut. Emily pressed herself into his side, whispering, "It's okay, I'm here, I won't leave you." His ears flicked, his growl vibrating through her chest. They were ready together. But Emily knew instinctively that this was only the beginning. The storm, the forest, the shadows, they all hid more than they revealed. Lightning illuminated the forest in a stark white flash. Emily saw the coyote, saw the danger, saw the path ahead. She knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not run. She could not. Rocco had saved her once, and together they would face whatever was coming next. The forest had claimed the attention of every living thing, but Emily and Rocco were bound by something stronger than fear. The officers and parents were still struggling to keep up, voices calling but distant and muted by the storm. Emily's world had shrunk to the dog beneath her, the path ahead, and the danger emerging from the shadows. Her small hands gripped him tighter, and she whispered again, voice steady despite the storm, "We're not afraid. Not with each other." Rocco's body tensed for the impending confrontation. The rain poured, the thunder roared, and the shadows shifted. The next moment would determine everything: their survival, their trust, and the fragile bond forged in the heart of chaos. Emily held on, knowing one thing for certain. She had chosen not to run, and that choice had led her to a truth far greater than fear itself. The forest waited, the storm waited, and the next move, the next confrontation, was about to begin. Emily didn't know yet what lurked just beyond the trees, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled and emboldened her simultaneously, that whatever came next would change everything. And as Rocco's eyes locked onto the approaching shadow, the forest seemed to lean closer, holding its breath. Something was coming. Something far worse than they had imagined. The forest seemed to close tighter around Emily and Rocco, rain pouring in relentless sheets, soaking through layers of clothing and fur alike. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the patter of rain, was amplified in the darkness. Emily's small hands were raw from gripping Rocco's damp fur, yet she refused to let go. She knew instinctively that if she released him, even for a moment, everything could be lost. Rocco's body trembled with exertion. His breathing was ragged, his sides rising and falling rapidly, but his amber eyes burned with fierce determination. He pressed himself closer to Emily, ears alert, scanning the forest. Emily could feel the raw energy emanating from him, a mix of fear, exhaustion, and instinctive courage. He wasn't just a dog, he was a guardian, a protector, a survivor. And in this moment she understood what that really meant. Suddenly the underbrush rustled again, louder, more deliberate. Emily's heart leapt into her throat. From the shadows emerged the source of their fear, a massive coyote, wild and desperate, eyes glowing in the storm's intermittent flashes. Its coat was matted and torn, ribs visible beneath its fur. Hunger and madness twisted its movements, and it lunged forward with lethal intent. Rocco responded instantly. Despite the pain in his leg, despite the fatigue and injuries that had plagued him since arriving at the facility, he moved with precision and authority. He leapt toward the coyote, teeth bared, and their clash echoed through the forest. Emily pressed herself against his side, whispering, "You can do it. I know you can. Stay strong." Her words were small, fragile, yet they seemed to carry a power all their own, and Rocco's amber eyes flicked to her for a moment, locking in understanding before returning to the fight. The battle was brutal. The coyote lunged, snapped, and tried to flank him, but Rocco anticipated every move, striking with calculated ferocity. Emily felt every impact through the tremors of his body, every strain in his muscles, and a new wave of fear swept through her. He was pushing himself to the absolute limit, risking everything for her. And yet, she could see in the coyote's wild eyes that it wasn't going to give up easily. Finally, with a sharp bark and a decisive lunge, Rocco sent the coyote yelping back into the shadows. It disappeared into the darkness, leaving the forest eerily silent except for the pounding rain and Rocco's heavy, labored breathing. Emily collapsed onto his side, mud streaking her face, tears mixing with the rain. "It's okay, we're okay," she whispered, clutching him tighter. She realized that for the first time in her life, she truly understood courage, not just her own, but the courage of another being willing to risk everything to protect her. The silence was broken by the distant sound of voices, closer now. The storm had scattered the officers and animal control staff, but some were catching up, flashlights cutting through the dark in uneven beams. Emily recognized one voice, trembling with disbelief and awe. "Is she okay?" The words barely reached her over the storm, but she nodded, pressing herself closer to Rocco. He shifted slightly, placing his body between her and the approaching humans as if to say, "I've got this." Then something shifted in Emily's understanding. She noticed the scars along Rocco's shoulders, the faint remnants of old injuries, the limping gait that hadn't slowed him even in the face of life-threatening danger. Suddenly, it clicked. This wasn't just any dog. This wasn't a stray. This was a trained animal, disciplined, strong, and battle-hardened. Her heart pounded as the pieces fell into place. The precision of his movements, the restraint in his aggression, the instinctive protective behavior, it all made sense. A nearby officer, one of the more senior staff, gasped audibly. "That dog, he's a retired police K-9, he shouted, startling Emily. "He went missing months ago after being injured on a raid. They thought he was dangerous, abandoned him because of his leg." Emily's eyes widened. The dog she had clung to, who had saved her life, who had fought fiercely and loyally, had been misjudged, discarded, and locked away like a menace. Emily's small hand stroked his wet, matted fur as she whispered, "You're a hero, you always were." Rocco's head lifted slightly, amber eyes meeting hers with an understanding that made her chest ache. He didn't need words. The bond they had formed in the storm, in the forest, in the chaos of life and death, spoke louder than anything anyone else could say. The storm had not relented. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in stark flashes, showing the officers cautiously moving toward them. One officer approached slowly, hand outstretched, voice calm but firm. "Easy, Rocco, you're safe now." The dog's ears flicked, his body tensing again, but Emily held on to him. "No," she said firmly. "He's protecting me. Don't come closer." The officer hesitated, then nodded, realizing that this bond was not to be broken lightly. Emily noticed blood seeping through his fur near his hind leg. Panic surged in her chest. "Oh no, he's hurt. He's so hurt." Her small hands pressed against his wound instinctively, as if she could ease the pain with touch alone. Rocco shifted slightly, nuzzling her hand, acknowledging her concern, and she felt a mix of fear, awe, and helplessness. He had saved her, and now she had to help him. Voices called out in the distance, sirens approaching, but Emily didn't move. She couldn't. She had already seen what Rocco was capable of, and she knew that leaving him now would betray everything he had done for her. And then she heard it, a soft whine, almost a sob, that seemed impossibly human for such a powerful animal. She realized with a lump in her throat that he was exhausted, injured, and had risked everything for her. Paramedics arrived, moving quickly but cautiously, assessing both Emily and the dog. Rocco allowed them to approach, but only because Emily remained pressed against him, whispering reassurances. "It's okay, I'm here, we're okay." The storm continued to rage, but in that chaotic moment, a fragile peace emerged. Emily understood that her choice not to run had brought her here, had saved her life, and had given Rocco a chance to prove his true nature. As they prepared to move him to safety, Emily's mind raced with a realization that chilled and inspired her simultaneously. This dog, so often misunderstood, so often labeled as dangerous and unmanageable, was not only her protector, he was a hero. And the truth of his past, the neglect and misjudgment he had suffered, added weight to every action he had taken to keep her safe. In the ambulance, Emily held his paw, tears streaking her mud-covered face. The storm outside was relentless, but inside the vehicle, a bond of trust and courage radiated stronger than any tempest. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Rocco's head rested gently against her shoulder, amber eyes closing briefly, but alertness never fully leaving him. And as the ambulance sped toward the nearest veterinary hospital, the reality sank in. The ferocious dog had saved the little girl, but neither of them had truly survived unscathed. Rocco's injuries were severe, and without immediate care, his life could be at risk. Emily's tiny hands clutched his paw, refusing to let go. She had chosen to stand her ground when everyone else had fled, and now she realized that courage alone might not be enough. The vet team waited, ready to assess the damage. Emily's parents arrived, faces pale with worry, but she didn't look up. Her focus was entirely on Rocco, whose amber eyes flicked toward her every few seconds, seeking reassurance. She whispered again, "You're my hero, you'll be okay, I know you will." The sound of machines and urgent voices swirled around her, but her world had narrowed to one thing, keeping him alive, holding on, and never letting go. Somewhere in the chaos of the storm, in the forest, in the rain-soaked streets and shadows, Emily had realized something profound. Appearances could be deceiving. A ferocious dog was not always a threat. Sometimes, those who seemed dangerous were the ones capable of the greatest acts of courage, loyalty, and love. And sometimes, the smallest person could see that truth when everyone else overlooked it. As the vet team prepared for emergency care, Emily pressed her face against Rocco's, feeling the tremors of his body beneath her hands. She knew the fight wasn't over, not for him, not for her, not for the bond they had forged in the storm. But she also knew that together, they could face whatever came next. And somewhere, beyond the walls of the hospital, the world waited, unaware that a little girl and a ferocious German shepherd had rewritten the definition of courage, trust, and heroism in one rain-soaked, storm-battered afternoon. The fluorescent lights of the veterinary emergency room were harsh and unrelenting, casting long shadows over the rain-soaked figure of Rocco, who lay on the cold metal table. His amber eyes, normally sharp and commanding, now flickered with pain and exhaustion, darting occasionally toward Emily. She knelt beside him, small hands clutching his paw, mud-streaked tears mixing with the remnants of the storm outside. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, her voice trembling yet firm. "I'm right here. I won't leave you." Rocco's breathing was shallow, uneven, each exhale a tremor that echoed through Emily's chest. The vet team moved with urgency, checking vitals, applying oxygen, and preparing for emergency surgery. Machines beeped and whirred, adding an almost frantic rhythm to the room. Emily's parents hovered at the edge of the chaos, pale, anxious, and unsure how to comfort a 7-year-old who seemed simultaneously terrified and resolute. But Emily didn't let go of Rocco, not for a second. Dr. Caldwell, the senior veterinarian, knelt beside the table inspecting the shepherd's injuries. His leg was badly lacerated, one side of his muzzle bore deep cuts, and bruising and scrapes covered most of his muscular body. "He's strong," Dr. Caldwell muttered under his breath, almost to himself. "But if we don't operate immediately, we could lose him." Emily's heart jumped. "Lose him," she whispered, clutching the dog's paw tighter. "Yes," Dr. Caldwell said softly, his eyes not leaving Rocco's battered form. "He's fighting hard, but the injuries are severe. The storm, the fight with the coyote, and his existing condition. It's a lot for one dog." Emily pressed her forehead to his fur, willing him to understand that she believed in him, that he had already survived more than most creatures could endure. Rocco's paw twitched beneath her fingers, a small but unmistakable sign of recognition. The vet team worked quickly, prepping the surgical area, administering anesthesia and monitoring vitals. Emily stayed by his side, whispering encouragements between breaths. "Stay with me, please, you're my hero, I know you can fight." Her words were tiny, fragile, yet filled the room with an undeniable force. A child's unwavering faith in a creature society had misjudged. Rocco's amber eyes flicked to her repeatedly, searching, connecting, understanding. Outside the emergency room, Emily's parents exchanged worried glances. "She shouldn't be in there," her mother whispered. "It's too dangerous, too traumatic." But her father shook his head. "She needs to be here. She's the only one who can give him the courage to fight. She's special." Inside the room, Emily didn't hear their whispers. Her focus was entirely on Rocco, on the battle they had begun together and weren't about to end now. Minutes passed like hours. The anesthesia took effect and the team began operating on the leg first, stitching deep wounds, cleaning lacerations, and stabilizing broken tissues. Emily's heart pounded with every movement, every sound, every beep of the machines monitoring his fragile life. Sweat mixed with rainwater and tears streaked her cheeks, but she didn't move. She whispered over and over, "Stay with me, stay with me." Then a complication. Rocco's heart rate dropped suddenly, the monitors beeping erratically. "He's going into shock," one nurse shouted, and the team sprang into action, injecting fluids, oxygen, and medications to stabilize him. Emily's hands gripped his paw even tighter, knuckles white, tears streaming freely. "No, you can't leave me, you can't," she cried, her small voice rising over the controlled chaos. Rocco's ears flicked at her words, and for a heartbeat his eyes met hers. In that gaze, Emily felt a spark of life, a will to survive, a silent promise that they weren't finished yet. Hours blurred into a tense rhythm of treatment, monitoring, and emergency interventions. Emily never let go. She whispered stories to him, sang little songs, recounted the adventure in the forest, the fight with the coyote, the storm, and how he had saved her life. Her voice, filled with determination and love, became a tether to reality, an invisible line connecting them through pain and fear. And Rocco responded not with words but with subtle signs. A tail flick, a paw twitch, a soft nuzzle. Finally, the procedure was over. Dr. Caldwell emerged, exhaustion etched into his face but relief flickering in his eyes. "He's stable," he said quietly. Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, pressing her face against Rocco's still warm body. But her relief was tempered by the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. His recovery would be long, painful, and uncertain. And every hour, every day would require vigilance, care, and an unbreakable bond. Emily's mother finally stepped inside the room, hesitating, her eyes wide at the sight of her daughter kneeling beside a dog who had fought for both their lives. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" she asked softly. Emily nodded, not looking up. "I'm okay. He's okay. We just have to stay with him, that's all that matters." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, understanding for the first time the depth of her daughter's courage, and the unique, unspoken connection that had formed between the little girl and the dog society had labeled dangerous. The hours dragged on. Emily never left Rocco's side. She fed him water drop by drop, stroked his fur, and whispered words of encouragement that seemed to reach deeper than any medicine, any machine. Slowly, imperceptibly, his breathing stabilized. His eyes fluttered open occasionally, amber orbs flicking toward her face, searching, recognizing, connecting. And in those moments, Emily felt a surge of hope. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the streets outside wet and glistening in the morning light. Rocco's injuries were severe, but he had survived the night. Emily's hands, raw and bruised from holding him, remained pressed to his body, whispering reassurances that he didn't need but somehow understood. She had made a choice to stay when everyone else had feared, and that choice had kept them both alive. Dr. Caldwell approached, speaking softly. "He's going to make it," he said. Emily's parents exhaled in relief. Emily, however, did not move her hands from Rocco's side. "He's not just going to make it," she whispered, voice trembling but certain. "He's going to recover. He's my hero." The doctor smiled faintly, realizing that the courage and determination of a 7-year-old girl had played as much a role in his survival as any medical intervention. Emily finally allowed herself a small, shaky smile as she pressed her forehead against Rocco's. Outside, the world began to awaken to a new day, but inside the small veterinary room, time felt suspended. It was as though the bond between them had forged a bubble of courage, love, and trust that no storm, no injury, and no chaos could penetrate. And yet Emily knew that this was only the beginning. The fight against the physical and emotional scars that Rocco bore and the challenges of finding him a safe, permanent home still lay ahead. She pressed a small kiss to his damp fur, whispering once more, "We did it, we survived the night, and I'm not letting go." Rocco's paw twitched beneath her fingers, his amber eyes meeting hers with a clarity that seemed to promise. The fight might be over for tonight, but their story, their journey, was far from finished. And in that quiet, rain-soaked hospital room, Emily understood the most profound truth she had ever known. Bravery was contagious, and love, unconditional, fearless, and unwavering, could heal wounds no medicine ever could. The night was over, but the story of courage, survival, and an unbreakable bond had only just begun. The morning sun pierced through the sterile hospital windows, illuminating Rocco's fur, still damp and matted from the storm, the fight, and the night of relentless struggle. Emily sat beside him, tiny hands pressed to his warm body, her face streaked with tears and mud. The events of the past hours felt like a surreal blur. The storm, the chase, the feral coyote, and finally the battle against time in the vet's care. And now, in the calm after the chaos, a fragile hope began to emerge. Rocco stirred. A faint shift, a subtle twitch of his ears, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. Slowly his amber eyes opened, flicking around the room with caution. Then recognition. When they landed on Emily's face, something almost human passed through his gaze. Relief, trust, and a quiet acknowledgement that she had stayed, that she had chosen to fight with him rather than flee. Emily laughed softly, a sound trembling with tears and disbelief. "You did it, big guy, you made it." The veterinary team watched quietly, some exchanging glances, realizing that the dog's will to survive had been fueled not just by instinct, but by the unwavering loyalty of the child at his side. Dr. Caldwell knelt beside Emily and Rocco, voice gentle. "He's stable, and it looks like he's going to make a full recovery," he said. Emily hugged him instinctively, but her mind was already racing. Stability was only the beginning. There were questions, challenges, and consequences still waiting outside this room. Her parents entered quietly, faces etched with exhaustion and awe. Her mother knelt beside Emily, brushing the wet hair from her forehead. "Sweetheart, you were amazing," she whispered. Emily only shook her head. "It wasn't just me, it was him. He saved me, Mom. He saved me when everyone else thought he was dangerous." Her father knelt, voice trembling. "I think everyone underestimated him, and maybe everyone underestimated you too." Emily pressed her forehead against Rocco's, feeling the rhythm of his breathing gradually steady. "We're okay now," she whispered. But even as she spoke, a storm of emotions churned inside her. The authorities who had chased them, the animal control officers who had labeled him Ferocious, the facility that had abandoned him, all of it hung over her like a shadow. She understood now that survival was not just about escaping danger, but confronting injustice. News of the incident spread quickly. By mid-morning, social media was flooded with videos and images captured by bystanders during the storm and the chase. The ferocious German shepherd who had escaped his cage and refused to abandon a little girl became an overnight sensation. Hashtags trended, millions shared the footage, and the narrative shifted almost instantly. The dog that everyone feared was now a hero. And the girl who refused to run became the symbol of courage and empathy in the face of fear. Emily's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, but she didn't look. Her focus was entirely on Rocco, who had finally allowed her to sit beside him, resting his massive head across her lap. She stroked his fur slowly, feeling the heat of his body, the subtle tremors of lingering pain, and the unspoken gratitude in his amber eyes. "You're a hero," she whispered. "Not just to me, but to everyone. You've proven who you really are." As the media coverage intensified, officials from the abandoned facility were forced to respond. The director, pale and defensive, issued a statement claiming that Rocco had been too aggressive for rehabilitation, that the decision to leave him behind had been for public safety. But the videos told a different story. A dog that had risked his life to save a child, disciplined and precise, never truly aggressive unless defending her. Emily's parents shared the footage with local news stations, demanding accountability. The tension escalated when animal control officers returned, now hesitant and apologetic. One of them, a younger officer who had chased Rocco through the storm, approached Emily cautiously. I didn't understand him," he admitted. "I thought he was dangerous, but you stayed with him, you trusted him. He saved you, I didn't realize." Emily looked at him with solemn eyes. "Maybe if someone had believed in him sooner, none of this would have happened," she said softly. Rocco, still recovering from his injuries, lifted his head slightly at the sound of the officer's voice, amber eyes meeting the man briefly. It was a silent acknowledgement, almost as if he understood the apology but didn't fully forgive. Emily reached out and placed a hand on Rocco's shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "He'll learn. We all have to learn." The media storm continued to grow. Interviews with Emily and her parents aired nationwide, recounting the events of the storm, the coyote, and the incredible bond that had formed. Experts spoke about Rocco's training, his discipline, and the tragedy of the misjudgment that had led to his abandonment. Across the country, viewers were captivated, not just by the drama, but by the undeniable truth that bravery, loyalty, and love often exist where least expected. Yet Emily's attention remained focused on Rocco. He stirred slightly, paw twitching, and she pressed her face to his fur, whispering stories of their adventure, reassuring him that the danger had passed. She realized, even in that quiet moment, that the bond they shared was unlike anything she had ever known. It was forged in chaos, trust, and the refusal to abandon one another in the face of fear. Her parents, exhausted but aware of the gravity of the moment, watched in silence. They understood that Emily had changed. Her bravery had deepened, her empathy had grown, and her understanding of courage had evolved. And they understood that Rocco had changed too. He had survived, not just the storm, not just the wild, but the neglect and misunderstanding of humans. He had emerged as a hero, but also as a symbol of what loyalty and love could accomplish. The hospital room remained quiet for hours, punctuated only by the soft beeping of monitors and Rocco's slow, steady breathing. Emily whispered to him endlessly, recounting their flight through the storm, the clash with the coyote, and the nights of uncertainty. Each word seemed to strengthen him, each touch seemed to reassure, and together they both began to heal, body and spirit intertwined. But even as relief settled in, a shadow of tension lingered. The facility that had abandoned Rocco faced lawsuits, public scrutiny, and outrage, but their defensive stance meant the fight for justice was far from over. Emily's parents were determined to ensure that the dog who had saved their daughter would never face such danger or misunderstanding again. And Emily herself understood that her courage was not just about surviving the storm. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the odds. By late afternoon, Rocco's condition had stabilized enough for him to rest without constant intervention. Emily remained at his side, brushing his fur, speaking softly, and occasionally dozing lightly with her head resting against his massive shoulder. It was a surreal peace, a quiet reward for a night of terror, chaos, and heroism. And as she drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she knew that the story was far from over. Outside the hospital, reporters, social media followers, and local authorities debated the implications of the events, while millions watched in awe. But inside that room, Emily and Rocco shared a bond that transcended media, fear, and misunderstanding. They had faced the storm together, fought against life-threatening danger, and survived. And in that shared survival, a profound truth emerged. Courage was not measured by size, age, or species. It was measured by loyalty, love, and the refusal to abandon those who depend on you. And somewhere deep within Rocco's amber eyes, Emily saw the unspoken promise. They had survived the storm, but their story, their fight, their journey, their bond, was only beginning. The storm had passed, but the reckoning was just beginning. And Emily, small and brave, realized that she was ready for it. The sun rose high above the city, but Emily barely noticed. Her focus was on Rocco, now resting in a soft, padded kennel at the veterinary hospital, his amber eyes tracking her every move. Though his fur had been cleaned and his wounds stitched and bandaged, the pain and fatigue still lingered in every muscle. Yet he lifted his head as she approached, tail giving a small, tentative wag, a quiet but unmistakable acknowledgement that the little girl who refused to run was still by his side. Emily knelt beside him, hands gently brushing his damp fur. "We did it," she whispered, voice trembling. "We survived the storm, and now everyone knows who you really are." Rocco let out a low, rumbling growl, almost as if he understood her words, almost as if he shared in the triumph. The bond they had forged through the chaos, the danger, and the storm had grown into something unbreakable, a trust that neither words nor time could undo. Outside, the storm of public attention had reached a fever pitch. News outlets aired footage of Rocco's escape, the chase through the forest, and his brave stand against the feral coyote. Millions of people across the country had watched a dog, once deemed dangerous and abandoned, save the life of a little girl. Hashtags praising Rocco as a hero trended worldwide. Social media feeds were flooded with images, messages of support, and offers from people who wanted to help this incredible animal. But Emily only cared about one thing: ensuring Rocco was safe and understood. Her parents approached quietly, eyes glistening with a mixture of relief, pride, and lingering fear. "Emily," her mother said softly, voice breaking, "you were amazing. You stayed with him when everyone else panicked. She stopped, choked up by the enormity of what her daughter had done. "You helped save him and you both survived." Emily shook her head. "I didn't save him, he saved me too. He's the hero." Her father nodded in agreement, a proud smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Then it's time everyone else sees it too." Meanwhile, at the abandoned facility, chaos reigned. The director and staff faced an avalanche of public outrage and legal scrutiny. Social media campaigns demanded accountability, and local authorities began investigations into the facility's treatment of Rocco and other animals. Statements were issued, but no words could undo the months of neglect, misunderstanding, and misjudgment that had led to the shepherd's abandonment. Across the country, people debated and argued, but one undeniable truth had emerged: Rocco had been a hero all along. Emily's parents worked tirelessly to ensure he was given the care, attention, and respect he deserved. They consulted with lawyers, animal welfare organizations, and veterinarians to secure his permanent well-being. And while Rocco healed physically, Emily spent every possible moment at his side, recounting their adventure, whispering encouragements, and building trust that would last a lifetime. Each day she saw progress, his tail wagging more confidently, his eyes brighter, and his spirit slowly returning from the trauma of abandonment and battle. Then came the moment Emily had waited for, the official recognition of Rocco's heroism. A local ceremony was held outside the veterinary hospital. Crowds gathered, cameras clicked, and reporters jostled for position. Emily stood on a small podium beside him, tiny hands clutching his leash. Rocco, calm and dignified despite the attention, allowed himself to be guided forward. Dr. Caldwell spoke, detailing the ordeal. The storm, the escape, the coyote, and the incredible bravery of both the little girl and the shepherd. When the award was finally handed to Emily, symbolic recognition of her courage and her role in saving Rocco, she held it up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's my hero," she said, voice strong and unwavering. "He saved my life and I'll never forget him, and I want everyone to know that he deserves love, care, and respect." Rocco nudged her gently with his nose, as if to affirm her words, and the crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, recording the moment for the world to see. But even amid the celebration, Emily understood something profound. Heroism wasn't about awards or recognition. It was about trust, courage, and the refusal to abandon someone who needed you, no matter the danger. She had stood her ground in the storm when adults had fled. She had refused to leave Rocco behind when others feared him. And in doing so, she had forged a bond that would last a lifetime, a bond stronger than fear, exhaustion, or adversity. Over the following weeks, Rocco's recovery continued. Emily remained by his side, watching as he regained strength, agility, and confidence. Their bond deepened, a quiet understanding passing between them with every touch, glance, and shared breath. Emily realized that their story had inspired countless people, but it had also transformed her. Fear no longer dictated her choices, trust was no longer given lightly but carefully, and courage had become something tangible, embodied in the steadfast loyalty of her canine companion. The abandoned facility was closed permanently, the director and staff facing legal consequences for neglect and misjudgment. Local media followed every development, highlighting the contrast between Rocco's heroism and the cruelty he had endured. And everywhere Emily went, people wanted to see the little girl who refused to run and the dog who risked everything to protect her. They had become symbols, not of fear, not of danger, but of the power of love, courage, and loyalty in the face of adversity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily and Rocco sat quietly in the backyard of their new home, the air scented with fresh rain and earth. She leaned against his massive shoulder, hands stroking his fur slowly. "We did it, Rocco," she whispered. "We survived the storm, we survived the fight, and now we're free." Rocco rested his head against her lap, amber eyes meeting hers, calm and steady. In that moment, the world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the quiet, unshakable bond between a little girl and a dog who had defied every expectation. Emily thought about everything they had endured: the storm, the chase, the feral coyote, the night in the hospital, and the long path to justice. She realized that their story had been more than survival. It had been a testament to courage, empathy, and the power of connection. And she understood that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The city continued its hustle, the media continued its coverage, and life outside went on. But Emily and Rocco had emerged changed, stronger, and unbreakably connected. Where fear once dominated, courage now resided. Where doubt once lingered, trust now prevailed. And where danger had threatened, love had triumphed. As twilight settled, Emily whispered one final promise, pressing her forehead against Rocco's. "We'll always be together. No storm, no danger, no misunderstanding. Nothing will ever separate us." Rocco responded with a gentle nuzzle, a quiet affirmation that the bond they had forged in chaos would endure for the rest of their lives. Somewhere in the distance, the city lights flickered, but Emily and Rocco remained in their small world of trust, bravery, and love. They had faced death, fear, and injustice, and emerged victorious. And though the story of that stormy day, the chase through the forest, and the battle against nature would live on in the hearts and minds of millions, for Emily and Rocco, it was simply the beginning of a lifetime together. The ferocious German shepherd, once feared and abandoned, now lay calm and content, having proven his heroism beyond any doubt. The little girl who refused to run had saved him in ways no one else could. Together, they had survived, thrived, and redefined the meaning of courage and loyalty. And as night fell, Emily held Rocco close, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. Outside, the world was vast, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel. But within the quiet glow of their shared triumph, there was only love, trust, and the unbreakable promise that no storm, literal or metaphorical, could ever sever. For Emily and Rocco, the storm had passed, but the legend of their bravery would echo forever.